Hi, I'm Jeff Sharon from UCF Sports Night. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
I'm director of the U.S. Department of Commerce's field office here in Central Florida. It's the Orlando U.S. Export Assistance Center. Trade is important to the health of the United States. U.S. exports are currently $1.163 trillion. Of the 146 million jobs in the U.S. economy, those related to trade pay higher wages. And export-related jobs are less vulnerable when the U.S. economy is in recession. Further, trade leads to more efficient companies who are better able to compete on price and quality, which results in stronger companies and more stable jobs for Americans. And export results in product innovation and greater specialization into high-tech fields, which contributes to our technology base and perpetuates America's lead among nations. The experts that you'll hear from this afternoon will give you the Florida perspectives on international trade. Our first speaker, Manuel Mencia, will focus on the report card for international trade for the state of Florida. Manny Mencia is Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the International Trade and Business Development Unit at Enterprise Florida Incorporated. Enterprise Florida is the state of Florida's public-private economic development and export promotion corporation. Mr. Mencia also serves on the Board of Directors of the Florida Export Finance Corporation, the World Trade Center Miami, Florida Trade Partners Alliance, Southeast U.S. Japan Association, and the Florida District Export Council. Our second speaker, Kathy Blalock, is Regional Representative for Trade Routes, a grassroots program for trade education within the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She's also a member of the Jacksonville World Trade Affairs Council. She'll be presenting information about free trade agreements as tools for Florida's prosperity. Our third speaker is Sean Snaith, Director of the Institute for Economic Competitiveness within the College of Business Administration at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Snaith is a member of several economic organizations and national forecasting panels, including USA Today's survey of top economists, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia's survey of professional forecasters, and the Livingston survey. Dr. Snaith will discuss our overall economic situation, the role of international linkages, and current forecasts for the state of Florida. Our fourth speaker, Cindy Flores, is Vice President for Global Trade Solutions at SunTrust Bank. She's also chair of the Central Florida chapter of the Florida District Export Council, and she serves on the board of directors of the Florida Export Finance Corporation. Ms. Flores will focus on the relationship of trade finance to the success of Florida exporters and importers in global markets. Finally, I'll be the last speaker. As director of the U.S. Department's field office here in Central Florida, I help Central Florida companies promote their products, services, and technologies in foreign markets and defend their commercial interests overseas. I also serve on the Florida District Export Council, on the planning board of the Central Florida Small Business Summit, and the management board of the Disney Entrepreneur Center. My comments today will focus on the few areas that, in my experience, exporting companies commonly overlook. If we've succeeded in our goals today, I hope that you leave the session with a sense of where we've been and where we're going. We're fortunate to live in a state that's open to trade and heavily engaged, a state with world-class ports, world-class infrastructure, world-class technology, and world-class companies always seeking new and innovative ways to build Florida's economy. With that, I'll hand the floor over to Manny Mencia.
Thank you, Ken, and I guess I'll use a podium so you have a place to sit. Good afternoon. Great pleasure being here with you. As Ken said, I head the International Division of Enterprise Florida. I guess it makes me the equivalent of the Chief International Development Officer of the state of Florida. And I guess since we've been the recipients of so much gloom and doom over the economy, both at the national level and the state, I figured that I would come and share some good news for you all, which is that there is one aspect of the Florida economy that it's doing extremely well. I mean, in fact, in many ways unprecedented well, and that's our international business development sector. I will apologize in advance. I think all of you were here when my CEO, John Adams, spoke this morning, and my flight from Miami was a bit delayed, so I wasn't here. By the way, I know there are students in the audience. Let me give you a tip for your future business career. It's a bad idea to miss it when your boss is speaking. You should be you should be sitting in the first row with a judicious face and nodding your head every time he makes a point. So I guess I probably lost some points today. But anyway, probably John shared with you the good news. Last year, 2007, Florida set an all-time record for international trade. I think probably more important to us here in Central Florida and in the state, our export sector. And when you sell something that is produced in your state, that's where the most benefit comes into your local economy. That's what creates the jobs in your economy, and we did extremely well last year. Our state set a record also for origin exports, $44.8 billion in exports. The corporates, obviously a weak dollar. Whenever the dollar goes down, when you travel abroad, that's a bad thing because it gets expensive when you go to Europe or any place else. If you've been there lately, you know what I'm talking about. But if you're selling a product manufactured in the United States, it's a lot cheaper for your client. It makes it more competitive. It's also cheaper for the foreign investors who want to set up companies in your state and create jobs and so on and so forth to invest. So a weak dollar tends to boost your international sector from the export side and from the investment side. Second element, I bet you heard from Dr. Terry McCoy this morning that the Latin American economies are doing quite well. In fact, they've been also in a winning streak now going on several years with very healthy growth. Some concerns in terms of whether that will go on for in the years to come, but right now it's doing extremely well. And when Latin America does well, the state of Florida tends to do well since they are our largest trading partners, they are our largest clients in the world. The third reason I see out there is that we have one of the fastest growing, one of the most rapidly expanding international sectors in the United States. The growth of international companies in the state of Florida in terms of numbers, in terms of sophistication, has truly been tremendous over the last few decades. Combine those, we have records. In fact, we've done so well that over the last 3 years, we've actually leapfrogged 3 states, Midwestern states that historically were much larger exporters than the state of Florida. And that doesn't even begin to tell the whole story. We not only are a great exporter of products, but we're also a tremendous exporter here in the state of Florida of services, particularly knowledge-based services, everything from legal to consultant to systems to healthcare services, and that added an additional $26 billion to the Florida economy. Combine the two, $70.8 billion in exports. Put it in perspective for you, that makes Florida the 4th largest exporter in the United States. We're only behind California, Texas, and the state of New York if you combine services with the export of Florida products. In fact, we're outperforming the nation by a significant margin. Florida exports last year grew by about 16.6%. National exports somewhat slower at 11.3%. By the way, I always like to mention this when we have mixed audiences like this. Most people, when they think of Florida exports, think of what? They think of oranges. They sometimes, those who know that we mine think of phosphate fertilizers. Well, the fact of the matter, the principal exports of the state of Florida today are high technology. Things like aviation products, information technology, health technologies. And by the way, that's important because those are the disciplines, those are the jobs, along with sectors, with services, knowledge-based services, that pay the higher wages, that we want to have out there, the jobs that we want to create for our children and for those of you who are in school at the moment and who will be going into the workforce soon. One sector of the international economy that isn't doing as well is the import sector. Reason, same as why we're exporting so dynamically. The dollar's weaker, therefore foreign products are more expensive, so you see a decline in imports. Imports declined by about 2.5% on the past year, which is not a significant decline. In fact, we still import more than we export. Although, believe it or not, the Customs District south to us, the Miami Customs District, which is not just Miami, by the way, it's all of South Florida, all the way to Fort Pierce, is the only, or actually one of two customs districts in the United States that is actually in the black, that actually sells more than we buy, and we actually have a very balanced trade here in the state of Florida. By the way, I have these slides for you in case my accent is a problem, so take a look at them. Anyway, 39,000 companies. I was telling you we have a very large international sector. 39,000 companies, over 39,000, export in Florida today. That's, ladies and gentlemen, the second largest concentration of exporters in the United States, right after the state of California. Put it in perspective for you. Over 16.5% of all the exporters in the United States do business here in the state of Florida, are based here. I know there's another differentiation which is really interesting on our export sector, which is that 95% of those exporters are small and medium-sized companies. In fact, that makes us unique. Those small and medium-sized companies actually export 61% of everything that our state exports to the rest of the world. Do you know what the average is for other states? It's about 29%. So participation in the state of Florida by the smaller guys is more larger than it is from in most of the other states, and that's good because everybody knows, maybe not everybody knows, but I'm here to tell you that companies that export grow faster, they pay better, they are more profitable, or at least that's what my friends at the U.S. Department of Commerce keep telling me, and it's true. And those companies in Florida, those 39 companies, 1,000 companies pay a lot better wages. In fact, now we have, believe it or not, 1.1 million people in the state of Florida that make a living out of international business. That's the second largest job creation engine in the state after tourism, with one big difference. The international jobs tend to pay much higher wages than the state average wages, while the tourism job, by definition, tend to be more entry-level jobs, less skilled jobs, and so on and so forth. So in my mind, this is the kind of job that we want to be creating in the future. Of interest to you, that's a little nebulous. But anyway, I can always get it to you if you have an interest. This basically is a chart, if you have good eyes, that tells you where we do business in the world. And you're going to find several things very interesting there. One of them is 68% of our business is with the nations of the Western Hemisphere. Nations of Latin America and the Caribbean largely, but Canada is also an important partner of ours. It's actually our second largest client anywhere in the world. This region of the world accounts for roughly, on any given year, about 68% of all the business that we do overseas. Second largest region for us is the European region. Typically, about 50% of our exports go to the nations of Europe, mostly to the European Union, very little to Eastern Europe and other parts of Europe, mainly to the large nations of the European Union. Next, and interesting also, we do about 11% with Asia. Japan historically has been a pretty good market for us. China and India are emerging markets for the state of Florida, although we have huge trade deficits with Asia. That's one of the challenges that we have as a business center. Most interesting of all, if you look, well, you probably can't see it, but what the last part of the slide reflects is that our business activities in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, are growing fairly healthy. I like to take a little bit of credit for that because the state of Florida was the first state in the United States to actually create an Africa Trade Development Program after our Congress passed what they call AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunities Act. We took advantage of it probably faster than anybody else in the United States, and we're beginning to get some dividends out of it, where our exports to Africa are growing a lot, and our business with Africa is growing a lot faster than the average in the United States. It's still a very small portion of our portfolio, but it's a fast-growing one. By the way, what all this means for us is good and bad. It's good because going back to the Western Hemisphere and Latin America, you could argue that no region of the United States, no other state of the United States has as much of a dominance on any other portion of the world as we have in this state of Florida with the nations of Latin America and the Caribbean. We're either number one or the number two trading partner of practically every nation in the hemisphere with the exception of Mexico and Canada. That's tremendous. It gives us a tremendous comparative advantage as a state. It's also bad from the standpoint that we have too many eggs in the one basket. That's why if you were to ask me what is a state international trade development strategy, I tell you it's twofold. One, we do want to hang on to that business in Latin America. That's a unique advantage. We can't duplicate that anywhere in the world. But then we need to diversify. We need to keep working with our exporters to help them sell in Europe, to help them sell in Asia, to begin to develop new markets in places like Africa and the Middle East. These are our main clients. Just some highlights there. Not surprising, if you notice, Brazil is our largest client in the world. Interesting is Canada is number 2 and drawing closer very fast. I think with the rise of the Canadian dollar against the US dollar, you could forecast that Canada could become probably as big a market for the state of Florida as is Brazil or any market in the world. You will notice Venezuela, a country that doesn't have the greatest political relationship with the United States today, is the third largest market for Florida. I call it the Chavez dividend. I think everybody knows that President Chavez is very forthcoming in investing, not always wisely, the national patrimony, the money that Venezuela is receiving from their sale of oil, which, as we all know, it's at record prices. Chavez is an enthusiastic spender in domestic programs, in aid to what he sees as the underprivileged classes of his country, and a lot of that translates into purchases from Florida, because whether he likes it or not, Florida is the number 1 supplier of Venezuela in the world. In fact, Florida sells more to Venezuela than most countries, than they do business with most other countries, independent countries in the world. Other things that you might want to find there is, notice the expanded trade that Florida has generated from countries where the U.S. has free trade agreements with. We've been historically small players in Mexico, our number 4 client. Trade with Mexico has been booming, close to 25% last year alone. Dial it a little bit lower, you're going to see Colombia, over 25%, over 20% growth in the last calendar year in 2007 also. I think everybody knows that we were not able to successful in passing our Colombia Free Trade Agreement. We do have some hope that there's still maybe opportunities to get something done, to get the administration and Congress together. I'll let Kathy expand on that. Let's hope so. In terms of other countries, You will see a slight decline in China there. Don't be surprised by that. Unfortunately, most of what we sell China is very primary type products, phosphate fertilizers, most of it. And I don't really know the dynamics of the industry, but there seem to be ups and downs in that industry, and you'll see years where they peak and they buy significantly more and significantly less. And whenever they buy more, you'll see Florida exports to China spike, because over 80% of everything that we sell to them is fertilizers. Again, I'm always proud to show this figure. If you notice, while I love Florida oranges, by the way, I'm a great supporter of the Florida citrus industry. It isn't oranges what we sell the world. Look at that. It's first and foremost computer products, yes, fertilizers, but then electronics and information technology, aviation-related office machines, vehicles. Those articles for arcades tend to be electronic games and those kind of things more than anything else, by the way, and so on and so forth. If you notice, most of those commodities are growing at a very robust pace also. Just very briefly looking into the future. And this is good for me because remember, my budget depends quite a bit on international business continuing to grow, or at least the legislature will see it that way. I hope the legislature will see it that way. I believe international business will continue to be probably the most dynamic aspect of the Florida economy, at least for the foreseeable future, probably the next year or two. As I said, there may be other sectors of the economy that are in the recession, not international business. It's doing extremely well. I think a weak dollar will continue to boost Florida exports and inbound foreign direct investment. Number three, expect, as you've seen before, nothing surprised there either, the high technology sectors to lead the way. I see, for example, I do see one trend there, the life sciences, things related to health technologies, taking a very big spike, both from the investment standpoint and from the export standpoints. Import volumes, however, should remain under pressure. Remember what I said before, we do business with Latin America. Less than other parts of the world. There's a twofold dynamic going on there. One of them, of course, the dollar, cheaper dollar, higher imports, higher prices for imports. If you're buying a foreign car or a product made someplace else in the world, you know it's more expensive. There's another dynamic. I think competition from China against our Latin American traditional suppliers is hurting their competitiveness. And while you may think, well, whether we buy from China, whether we buy from Latin America, doesn't matter, it does matter. It does matter in this case because the Latin American nations are our principal clients, and if they are less able to sell to us and generate the foreign currencies that they need to buy, they might be more likely, less likely to buy products from us. And that's one of the challenges the emergence of Asia and the emergence of China in particular presents to a state like the state of Florida. I wanted to share that with you. I do have some concerns longer term on Latin American economic expansion. I think growth will be fine this year, maybe not as fast as it has on the previous 2 years. I'm concerned beyond that whether the U.S. slowdown and the predictable slowdown on world economic activity, when the U.S. economy takes a downturn such as it is today, it's going to affect Latin America. And the reason for that is, like many regions of the developed world, Latin America historically has not been in control of its own destinies when it comes to international business. They are exporters of commodities, so they are not subject to internal growth factors, but rather external growth factors. They grow when foreign demand grows and so on and so forth, not based on their own dynamics. Final predictions also, by the way, this is very predictable, doesn't make me particularly intelligent to say that. European, Canada, auto continue to drive our foreign direct investment. Our principal investors in the world has been typically the European Union and Canada, but I do see Asia which finds our port and distribution infrastructure in Florida very intriguing and very attractive, particularly in recent years, I think you will see more and more investment coming in from Asia. As usual, I've always said, give a Latin the microphone and he'll never get off the podium, but as usually I probably took a little longer than I should, but it's a pleasure being here with you, and if you have any questions afterwards, I hope to be available. Thank you.
I have a question for Manny. How much trade goes through Florida to Cuba? The United States sold $437 million worth of agricultural products last year. I'm just curious if you know something about that.
In fact, I could probably give you an exact number if I could reach into my briefcase and give you a number. If memory serves me correctly, went down somewhat this past year, but it's been in the double-digit million amounts, mostly food. I think some of it goes out of Tampa, some out of the Jacksonville area, if my memory serves me correctly. It's not a tremendous amount of it. As $437 million really is not all that much money. Not from my perspective, given the potential of what it could be, should things eventually normalize and the Cuban government evolve into something a little more market oriented. But I'll be happy later on, since we communicate, to send you some exact numbers.
Ken, thanks very much. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Let me begin by thanking the University of Central Florida and the partners here for inviting me to talk with you today. I'm filling in for Brian Dean, who's Executive Director of Gateway Florida. Brian and I have worked together closely in the last several months on the most pressing trade issue that's facing Florida and our country, which is the Florida Trade Promotion Agreement. He was called away today to attend to some urgent business in Tallahassee, so I'm pleased to be here sharing with you a message that I think is a joint message for both Gateway Florida and for trade routes and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And that message is simple. Trade is the future for our country, and trade means jobs and prosperity here in Florida. However, trade is under attack nationally, and we need your support in order to keep this vital engine of economic growth moving ahead. I had a lot of statistics in my speech, which Manny covered in great detail. I think I'll skip some of those. The good news is that Florida is doing very well in the international market, with over $44 billion in exports last year and hundreds of thousands of jobs created, good-paying jobs because of international trade. It's very clear that trade is important here in Florida. One of the questions we always ask when we talk to crowds is, who do you think is creating these jobs? In Florida, we know that it's large companies, but it's also those 39,000 small businesses in Florida. 95% of those companies are exporting. 95% of the exporters in Florida are small companies, 500 employees or less. Last week I was in Hialeah, and I met a company that we profiled for our series called Faces of Trade. The CEO is Howard Melamed, and his company is called Cell Antenna. They employ 20 people. They're in Coral Springs, Florida. And his product is cell phone equipment, and they sell it into Poland, and they were recently in Colombia. And he expects to be able to do some excellent business in Colombia with the passage of the free trade agreement down there. When I talked to him, he emphasized that 60% of his employees are dependent on international trade. Now, that's not a story that you're going to read about in the headlines, but it's one of tens of thousands here in the state of Florida. Trade plays an equally important part nationally. Let's not forget that 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States. Trade today is equivalent to about 1/3 of our entire U.S. economy, and it supports at least 12 million good-paying American jobs. trade, and the worldwide economy have helped bolster the balance sheets of American households by delivering higher incomes, lower interest rates, increasing investment opportunities. They've lowered prices, they've given us more choices, and provided higher worker compensation. With such overwhelming evidence in favor of trade, how could so many Americans' beliefs be disconnected from reality? A recent Fortune magazine poll, and we know this is an excellent publication, shows that American workers said that free trade, in fact, was a bad deal. The majority of American workers feel that it's a bad deal for our country. TV talking heads are fanning the flames of isolationism every single day. I believe that they couldn't be more wrong, and I know based on many of the presentations and questions we've had today that many of you agree. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is setting the record straight on trade. Trade Roots is our national grassroots trade education program. We work in conjunction with partners across the country, partners like Gateway Florida, Enterprise Florida, the U.S. Department of Commerce, with state chambers like the Florida State Chamber and local chambers across states and in large and small communities to tell the story of trade and let Americans know why trade matters to us. How are we doing this? We're doing it 4 different ways, and I'm going to talk about all of those and encourage each of you to see how you might be able to fit some of what I talk about and why trade is important into your own lives. The first thing that we're doing is making the case for fair trade. That's right, I said fair trade. You see, the status quo is often very unfair for the American worker and for American farmers. We have one of the most open markets in the world, yet when we ship our products and services overseas, they are subject to high taxes and tariffs. In a world where the terms of trade are unfair, trade agreements are not the problem, they are the solution. Free trade agreements are a crowbar that we can use to pry open those markets and eliminate those tariffs. That will allow our small companies to export even more products and to create more good-paying jobs. As an example, we've already heard about the Colombia Free Trade Agreement more than once today. There's a raging debate in Washington about this, and it's really hard to understand what the fuss is about when you look at what the agreement would actually accomplish. Nearly everything that we import from Colombia enters our market duty-free. Colombian coffee, bananas are just 2 examples. But U.S. exports into Colombia face an average tariff of 14%. So when we bring Colombian flowers into the United States, they pay no duties. But if we send American, U.S.-made Miracle Grow into their market, it has a high duty. Same for Washington State apples. That is not fair to the American products. This agreement would help eliminate these disparities. This agreement would eliminate most of those tariffs immediately. And that means a level playing field for American workers, farmers, consumers, and companies. Governor Christ already understands the benefit and impact of trade in Florida, and as does the Florida legislature. Earlier this year, Governor Christ sent a letter to Congress urging them to support the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, and today, thanks to the leadership of Representative Juan Zapata, the Florida State Legislature has passed a resolution declaring today, April 16th, 2008, as Columbia Day, and asking the Florida Congressional Delegation to promote and support the Columbia Trade Promotion Act. Thank you, Representative Zapata. The second thing that we do at Trade Roots is that we're trying to get the facts out on trade. Trade Roots has held hundreds of meetings across the country, bringing together stakeholders just like you to discuss the importance of trade in local communities. The Chamber is making the case for trade on Capitol Hill as well, making sure that they understand that free and fair trade agreements that benefit workers, consumers, and the American companies are considered. You'd be surprised how many people we talk to that don't understand some of the basic items in the Colombia Free Trade Agreement, as we just explained. You can make the case in Washington as well. Many of you picked up a CD on a table out front called the Colombia Free Trade Toolkit for Florida. That has examples of letters, data, and facts that you can use to send a letter to your congressional representative. In many cases, our member companies are starting education processes of their own employees. For an example, the heavy equipment manufacturer Caterpillar, much of its booming business has depended upon exports. The company has hired more than 13,000 workers since 2006, due in large part to its growing sales in China. However, Caterpillar discovered even its own workers didn't understand how exports benefited them. So they started painting messages on the equipment parts as they moved through the production process. This tractor is bound for X country. Workers quickly grasped the idea that the assembly line might grind to a halt and they might lose their jobs if the company was not selling a lot of its products overseas. So telling the real story of trade in your own organization is an excellent way of spreading the word. The third way is that the U.S. Chamber is acknowledging that many workers and consumers benefit from trade, but there are some facts. Workers are sometimes dislocated, and they deserve our support. They deserve new opportunities, they deserve retraining programs so that they can succeed in the 21st century economy. That's why the Chamber strongly supports the reauthorization of trade adjustment assistance. It will help ensure America's workers have access to the education, to the job training, and to the tools they need to return to work quickly. It's also why we've launched a major education initiative to ensure that students are equipped from day one with the skills that they need to succeed in our high-tech and rapidly changing economy. Finally, we ask all of you to consider the alternative to trade. Sometimes, suppose we were to shut off our markets and build a wall around our country. Suppose we said we won't trade with the rest of the world. Suppose we decided we would opt out of NAFTA. Then what would happen? Prices for American families would go up, you would be denied the choices that you're used to in the marketplace, and other nations would retaliate, closing off their markets, which could destroy American jobs. The millions of Americans employed by either U.S. exporters or by foreign companies operating in the U.S. would be headed for the unemployment line, and that includes the 1.1 million folks right here in Florida. If you want a major recession, we ask you, shut down world trade. That would be the fastest route. In conclusion, I want to say that no one would argue that these are challenging economic times, and many in Florida, as we heard today, are feeling the pinch. We know the issues that our nation has to address, but the question is this: do Americans have the strength, the will, the desire, the imagination to tackle these tough issues? Will we choose to listen to defeatist and doom and gloom crowds who say that we must protect what we have and fear the unknown and the future? Or will we embrace tomorrow with the same sense of determination, hard work, optimism, and creativity that helped create the United States and the greatest country on earth? Trade can be an engine to help fuel the tremendous growth of this state and this nation and position it for great success in the 21st century. Please join us in our support of trade. Many of you have seen my table in the front outside the door here. We have a laptop computer there where you can send a letter to your member of Congress in supporting the Columbia Free Trade Agreement, which, as we've mentioned many times, is the next big test of the country's commitment to international trade. It only takes 3 minutes to do a letter, and you'll have a great impact on your state. I believe that if we work hard to educate Americans on the facts of trade, we will make the right decisions. We will create a better nation for our children and our grandchildren. The hard work begins today, right here and right now, and I ask that you join us. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon. I don't have slides either, but I do have a little black book, and there's no sadder read than an economist's little black book, let me tell you. Before the great explorers had sort of reached all four corners of the earth, ancient cartographers, ancient map makers had gaps in their knowledge. And perhaps you've seen copies of some of these olden maps where they plotted out what they knew, but beyond that, where the explorers hadn't reached, they didn't know what was out there. So oftentimes they depicted these areas in the map with sea creatures, with giant tentacles that were wrapped around a ship, pulling these mariners to certain deaths. Latin that, thank you, Sister Clarice, I was able to read, that say things like, here there be certain death, or here is the stench of death, or here there be dragons. So basically the notion was that if you went out beyond what was known into these regions of the map, into the unknown, a certain doom awaits. And I think there's a lot of that going on right now with regards to the economy. In many ways, we're sailing into uncharted waters, into the unknown. We've never experienced the housing boom that we just went through the past 7 years. We've never been on the downside of the housing boom. We've never had experience with these mortgage-backed securities that have been sliced and diced and repackaged together until nobody really knows what they're worth. So there's all this uncertainty out there. We've never seen oil prices as high as they have risen in recent days. We've never seen other commodity prices reach the levels that they have. So it's not surprising to me to see people sort of adopt that old cartographic mentality that there's certain death awaiting us as we enter this unknown period in the economy. That more and more often you see the Great Depression being invoked in articles and in reporting. And I think by and large that is mostly sensationalism. This is a period of uncertainty, and perhaps the greatest one we've had since the 1970s, where we've got this risk of recession or an ongoing recession coupled side by side with the real and in my opinion, the greater danger of a sustained price inflation. It's been a long time since we've had to balance those two risks side by side, and it is problematic because they each call for very different policy prescriptions. So I don't want to play down the level of risk that we currently face in the economy. At the same time, I don't think we're necessarily sailing into the clutches of some sea monster. Now, I want to spend a little time talking about recession and the business cycle in general before I get on to the other comments. A recession, as our earlier speaker said, the rule of thumb actually is 2 quarters of consecutive decline in real GDP. That's a textbook sort of definition of a recession. That's not actually how it's determined. The organization, the group that determines a recession is known as the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research. And they look at a wide variety of economic data, economic indicators, but they do so well after the fact. And you might think of it as an economic autopsy. Nobody can say right now definitively that we're in a recession because this group won't convene, they won't meet for 6 or 12 more months to make that decision. And when they do, they'll look at not only what happened to real GDP during this particular period, but a wide variety of other indicators as well. Now, recessions and expansions, the business cycle in general, and the business cycle in a way is a bit of a misnomer. It is a recurrent phenomenon in our economy, and it's been going on for hundreds of years. Periods of expansion are followed by periods of slowdown or contraction that are followed again by periods of expansion. No 2 recessions are exactly alike. No 2 expansions are exactly alike. They're like, the business cycle is like an economic snowflake. The structure of the economy changes over time. The shocks that permeate throughout the economy change over time. And because the structure is changing, the way that those shocks expand and carry themselves through the economy changes over time as well. So looking back at previous cycles provides some information, but it's never going to give us a definitive path that we can expect to follow. But let me just talk a little bit about what the business cycle's been doing recently and over the history of the United States. The past 2 recessions lasted 8 months each. So if we're in a recession that started at the beginning of the year, we're halfway there, and as Bon Jovi said, living on a prayer. The average expansion over time has gotten much longer. The average recession's gotten much shorter. It used to be in the 1800s, a recession would last on average 24, 25 months, the same amount of time that an expansion would last. So a recession lasted over 2 years then. over time we've been able to shrink not only the length but the depth, the severity of recessions, and expand the good times, allow the expansions, the periods of economic growth to be longer in the course of the business cycle. I think a lot of that has to do with economists and policymakers' understanding of how the economy works, what you need to do and when you need to do it, when you sense things are going on. And so we saw in the current situation, monetary policy, fiscal policy, a double-barreled stimulus aimed at the economy, aimed at pulling us out of this malaise, this slowdown, this recession. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's a bad economic time, and we need to correct the situation. But the combination of fiscal and monetary policy is particularly powerful, and I think that will do a lot to help us pull out of this situation in the third quarter. Okay. What are the roles of international linkages in terms of the economy? We've heard a lot of talk about international trade, and certainly the sale of goods and services to and from countries outside the U.S. is an important component of our economy. And in fact, if you look at the past several reports on GDP growth, if it wasn't for our growth in exports, the declines or the slowdown in overall GDP growth would have been quite pronounced, because residential investment, as you well know, has fallen off the table, and that's quite an anchor weighing around the neck of the economy. But exports have been there to give us some wind beneath our wings when we really need it the most. But trade in goods and services is just one component. There's the other linkages that I would argue are not often mentioned in the press, but perhaps just as important, if not more. And that is the financial linkages between the U.S. economy and the rest of the world. The subprime mortgage meltdown and these mortgage-backed securities, these were held across the world, not just by financial institutions within the U.S. So the pain of this meltdown has been dispersed, thankfully, across the globe. We didn't have to absorb that all ourselves within our own financial system. And I think to some extent that certainly eased the severity of the blow. The other side is, what are interest rates right now? We're running record budget deficits here during the Bush administration, not unlike what we did during the Reagan administration. During the Reagan administration, interest rates on a 10-year bond were in the 13% to 14% range. Right now, the 10-year bond's about 3.6%. Same situation, record budget deficits. The government's issuing a lot of bonds to pay for that spending, but interest rates are much lower. Why is that this go-round? What's the difference? Well, the difference is holdings of foreign companies, holdings of foreign central banks, holdings of foreign individuals. Only 22% of outstanding Treasury debt in 1984 was held internationally. Currently, that number is around 53%. So there's a lot of concern and angst over China and Japan, for example, holding almost $1 trillion worth of U.S. government debt. But I would argue that that allowed the housing boom to do what it did. It's softening the impact of ongoing budget deficits on the U.S. economy, and it's allowing firms and households to borrow at a much lower interest rate than we would be able to in absence of these foreign capital flows. So these linkages are not only important when it comes to trade in goods and services, but financial flows as well are extremely important component of our international connections in terms of the economy. What about our Florida outlook? Let me just touch on that, and I know I only have another 40 minutes, so I'm going to stay within these bounds. I promise. The Florida outlook, and by the way, if you don't know, our forecasts are available on the Institute for Economic Competitiveness website for free. You can download both our national forecast and our state and metro forecast if you suffer from insomnia. The Florida outlook's changed significantly. You'll notice that if you look back at the past several quarters of our outlook. And I realized that we have been looking through at the Florida economy, as I wrote, through a glass darkly. We have been saying that the Florida economy was withstanding the housing slowdown. Why were we saying that? Why were our forecasts indicating that? Well, the data we were getting on payroll employment showed that all the way through 2007, Florida continued to add jobs, despite the impact of the housing slowdown. And then on March 7th, things changed. They revised that data. They re-benchmarked the employment data, and well, lo and behold, we've been losing jobs since August of 2007. And Rumsfeld, if I could paraphrase what he said, you go to forecast with the data you have, not the data that you wish you had. And so we were basing ours upon that preliminary data, but things have changed quite significantly. So we're looking at a continued loss of jobs overall in the state of Florida through the third quarter of the year. Then we're not going to bounce right out of this with spring in our step, unfortunately. The housing slowdown is going to take some time to recover from. Both builders and buyers are going to be particularly wary once we touch bottom, and I think it'll be a fairly slow climb through 2009, and we won't see more Florida-like growth until 2010. So we've still got another year and a half of pretty subpar conditions, at least what we've grown accustomed to here in the state. Without those international linkages, I can only think that things would be much worse than they currently are. I've been watching this John Adams miniseries on HBO. So, so maybe I've had this on the mind, but I think the British are coming, and the new Paul Revere signal should be 1 if by land, 2 if by shopping mall, because every time I go out there, that's all I seem to see. And these are not, I think, dukes and duchesses. These are people from the village of Snaith, where my ancestors came from. And, but the weakness of the dollar allows them to come over, and certainly that's helping to prop up our economy. So I can't stress the importance of these international linkages. And I believe that the talk of protectionism, I think, is overblown. It's political in nature. I think a lot of us realize the importance of international trade and how important it is to remain connected to that global economy. And I think that's going to be a big reason that we're able to get through this period without succumbing to the sea monsters. Thank you.
You told us about the amount of foreign investment in our country. I think it was 51%, something like that, in bonds. Is there any danger in that long term?
Well, every now and again there's some mid-level Chinese official that does some chest thumping about how they're going to dump U.S. dollar-denominated assets. And, it sounds real scary. But you need to think about the motivation as to why they've accumulated these assets in the first place. About 2/3 of holdings of U.S. government bonds overseas are known as, or what are known as official reserves. That means that they're held by the central banks of foreign countries. So why does the central bank of China buy U.S. government treasury bonds? Well, that's the way foreign central banks intervene in foreign exchange markets. And so the Chinese currency for a long time was pegged against the U.S. dollar. Now it's pegged against the basket of currencies, and it's appreciated slightly, not even close to the degree that our other trading partners' currencies have appreciated. But the reason that hasn't is that the Chinese government is preventing that from happening, and the way that they intervene in foreign exchange markets is not pushing one of those carts at the airport and tossing out yuan, but by buying these treasury bonds. So they're doing it to keep their exchange rate from appreciating, to protect their export market in the U.S. So to dump all of that would be to cut off their own nose despite the face. So I think it's folly when I hear those threats. No, I think it's a vote of confidence. If you're a newly minted millionaire or billionaire in India or China, where are you going to park your wealth? In a state-run bank or in U.S. Treasury bonds? I think it's a perfectly fine thing, and I don't think it's a threat at all.